Hello, this is the recording for lesson 2.05 and we're going to be going over the types of natural selection. So far we've learned about evolution and how it is a change in the population's allele frequency or how common an allele is over time. So let's review what we've gone over in the last 3 lessons. The first thing is that every organism is fit to live in its environment because it has adaptations that will allow it to survive and reproduce, right? So live or survive. And remember that in order for an organism to be fit in its environment, it needs to be able to do both of those things. Every organism is part of a population of similar living things. Remember when we define a population, we can define it as organisms that are the same species, live in the same space, share the same space, and also reproduce with one another. Okay, so those are the 3 characteristics of a population. All the genes that are in that population make up that population's gene pools. So all the genes, all the alleles that exist make up the gene pool. There's also variation in traits and alleles that exist in all these populations. Remember, variation means differences in the genes. If something in the environment changes, then organisms with one kind of trait may be selected for or against, which means certain ones are more likely to survive than the other. If that happens, it could lead to an allele frequency change, which would then lead to evolution. Okay, so here we see an example of an adaptation. We learned about that. The long beak of this hummingbird allows it to eat properly. We see variation and in all of these fish, right? We see different colors of this golden butterfly fish, different sizes, and all of those genes make up its gene pool. We see variations in this population here. We see different hair color, different skin color, probably different heights, etc. And we also talked about this snake, how if it came into an environment and was introduced and targeted a certain type of organism, then it could change the makeup of a certain species. So we know what evolution is, but there are certain things that can cause it. We went over a couple of things: mutation, migration, genetic drift, and recombination. And then we really focused on natural selection. And these are all causes of evolution, things that may cause for allele frequencies to change. So mutation does change the frequencies of alleles or how common an allele is. But honestly, if there's just one mutant allele among all the genes in the population, it probably isn't going to change the frequency very much. For example, if just one organism had it amongst like 1,000 in the population, it's probably not going to make a difference. The same is true as if you have a population of 1,000 and only one new organism migrated into your population. However, if it was a small population, right, let's say that there's only 100, or let's say even only 20 organisms, then if even just one organism came in, it would likely make a bigger change. When natural selection acts on a population, for example, when a predator ends up selecting for a mutant allele, right, then the allele frequencies really can change. And so what this means is when one organism is favored over another based on the demands of the environment, then definitely we can see an overall shift in the population. So natural selection is considered one of the most powerful ways that an allele frequency can change, one that we can actually observe. So there are different types of natural selection. So it really just depends on what kind of changes are happening in the environment. For example, if the demands of the environment are changing, then it can cause different types of natural selection. For example, natural selection can be responsible for any of these adaptations. Teeth for chewing grass, right? Because this makes them more likely to survive. Horns for defense against predators, or even for mating. Muscular legs for fleeing predators, and the list goes on. So there are 3 different types of natural selection that we are going to talk about. All of these are types of natural selection, which means that the certain traits are selected for that make an organism more fit for the environment. Okay, so here's the first way. It's called directional selection. And the reason why it's called directional is because natural selection ends up favoring one end of the spectrum than the other. So we can go back to our hypothetical example of the green skipper butterflies and those new birds that came in. In our example, we said that the birds actually saw the blue butterflies better than the red ones. Right? So they're able to see the blue ones more, which means they ate the blue ones more. So here we see that it's mostly green, right? Green butterflies, right? We see that there's mostly green butterflies, not that many blue and not that many red. However, because the birds saw all of these blue butterflies and didn't see the red ones, we're probably going to see a shift towards more green ones. More red ones. And this is called directional selection. So we see before we used to have a lot of green ones, right? It used to be all the way up here, but look how low it is now, right? It's all the way down here. So we see that overall shift towards more red ones and very little blue ones. We see none right here. Until finally, we see an overall pattern of almost all red ones right here. Again, directional selection is natural selection selecting for one variant over the others. Okay, here's another one. It's called stabilizing selection. So stabilizing selection is when natural selection favors individuals with average characteristics. So it's going to be somewhere in the middle. So remember when we talked about the green skipper butterflies, we said that there's mostly green. And let's say that these birds, instead of not being able to see the red ones, let's say that they were able to see red and they were able to see blue. If they're able to see both of these, then what would happen is there would be less and less of each of these butterflies, which means that there'll probably be more and more of the green ones. And so the average characteristic would be favored. So we can see this progression. So we see over time, we see less and less until finally we see more of these green ones heavily favored. What the result of this is variation is definitely reduced. Instead of some are red and some are blue, it's mostly all green. The last one is called disruptive selection, and this is when individuals with extreme characteristics are favored. So it's going to be the characteristics on the extreme ends. So again, we know that the green skipper butterflies, originally green was the most prevalent out of all the colors. However, over time, because let's say that these birds really enjoyed eating the green ones, the amount of green butterflies would decrease, and then these sides would increase, right? Because they can see green, but they can't see red or blue as well. So we'll see an overall progression of that, and you see that we have 2 hills, right? And in the middle, we see nothing here, okay? So, and that's because 2 of the sides are favored, whereas the middle, the average, is not. So that was the end of our lesson for the different types of natural selection. So let's look at a summary. So remember that allele frequency change, which pretty much means is another way of saying evolution, can be caused by mutation, migration, and genetic drift. And we focused on one of the causes, natural selection today. We looked at the different types of natural selection. One is directional, where it goes in either where it goes in one direction, right? One of the traits are favored. Stabilizing, where we have the average favored. And then disruptive, where we have the extreme ends favored, right? So again, those are different types of natural selection. So it's really important that you remember that evolution is caused by natural selection for one, and these are different types of natural selection. Out of all of these causes of evolution that we have gone through, it's important to note also that natural selection is the most powerful force in changing a population's allele frequency. So here are some important vocabulary words that you need to know. Natural selection, which we went over, which is the process in which the natural environment acts on individuals so that those with favorable traits survive and reproduce, and those that do not have traits, and those who do not have those traits are eliminated. We have directional selection, where the selection tends to favor one extreme. Stabilizing, where it favors the average. And then lastly, disruptive, where it favors the extreme traits, which are at each end.